Okay, we can start.
Okay, everyone ready over there? Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the European Medicines Agency in Amsterdam to this virtual press briefing. Today, our safety committee, the PRAC, continued its discussion of the rare cases of blood clots in people who received the AstraZeneca vaccine against COVID-19 that have been observed in several EU member states. During this press briefing, we will inform you about the outcome of the discussions by the PRAC, details of the assessment and the next steps. My name is Marie-Agnes Heine and I'm the head of the Communication Department at EMA. And I'm delighted to have with me Mrs. Ema Cook, the Executive Director of EMA, Dr. Sabine Strauss, the Chair of EMA's Safety Committee, the Pharmacovigilance Risk Assessment Committee PRAC, and I'm also very pleased to introduce to you Dr. Peter Arlett, the Head of Analytics at EMA, who can provide additional information about the agency's scientific procedures if needed. Before we start, I want to explain how we plan to run this press briefing. Please note that your microphone is disabled by default for the duration of the press briefing. We will first hear short remarks by Mrs. Cook and Dr. Strauss, and after that we will have about half an hour for questions. Once the question and answer session starts, please raise your hand in WebEx if you want to ask a question. To raise your hand, you will have to click on the icon next to your name in the list of participants. When I will give you the floor, you will be prompted on your screen to unmute yourself. We would appreciate if you could turn on your camera when you are asking a question. Today's briefing is being broadcast via YouTube and Europe by satellite. The footage can be used free of charge by all media. You will find the respective links in the invite sent yesterday. I'm now handing over to Mrs. Cook. Mrs. Cook, please.
Thank you, Marie-Agnes, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining this press briefing. Our expert committee on the safety of medicines, the Pharmacovigilance and Risk Assessment Committee, has now come to a conclusion on the review of cases of blood clots in people vaccinated with AstraZeneca's COVID-19 vaccine. The committee has come to a clear scientific conclusion. This is a safe and effective vaccine. Its benefits in protecting people from COVID-19 with the associated risks of death and hospitalisation outweigh the possible risks. The committee also concluded that the vaccine is not associated with an increase in the overall risk of thromboembolic events or blood clots. Now, during the investigation and review, we began to see a small number of cases of rare and unusual but very serious clotting disorders, and this then triggered a more focused review. Based on the evidence available and after days of in-depth analysis of lab results, clinical reports, autopsy reports and further information from the clinical trials, we still cannot rule out definitively a link between these cases and the vaccine. What the committee has therefore recommended is to raise awareness of these possible risks, making sure that they're included in the product information. Drawing attention to these possible rare conditions and providing information to healthcare professionals and vaccinated people will help to spot and mitigate any possible side effects. We're also launching additional investigations to understand more about these rare cases, and we're conducting targeted observational studies. About 7 million people have now been vaccinated in the EU with the AstraZeneca vaccine, and 11 million have been vaccinated in the UK, and there is increasing use of this vaccine in other countries. It remains very important that all side effects are closely monitored and reported so that we can evaluate them and see if there's any need to update the information and warnings about possible risks. Dr. Strauss will explain the committee's evaluation in more detail, but I want to reiterate that our scientific position is that this vaccine is a safe and effective option to protect citizens against COVID-19. It demonstrated that at least 60% efficacy in clinical trials in preventing coronavirus disease, and in fact the real-world evidence suggests that the effectiveness could be even higher than that. We're very much aware that some member states have paused vaccinations waiting for EMA's outcome of a review. But given that thousands of people in the EU die every day, and in fact over 2,500 were reported one day last week, it really was crucial for EMA to review rapidly and thoroughly all the available evidence. So we made this review our highest priority, and our experts have worked intensively to analyse in great detail all the data available. We have mobilised European experts in the field of thrombosis and blood disorders to investigate, and we work closely with other health authorities across the world, including with the UK's MHRA. The scientific conclusions adopted today provide Member States with the information they need to take an informed decision regarding the use of the AstraZeneca vaccine in their vaccination campaigns. Before I hand over to Dr. Strauss, I would like to highlight that a situation like the one we have just seen here is not unexpected. When you vaccinate millions of people, it's inevitable that rare or serious incidences or illnesses will occur in the time immediately following vaccination. Our role in the EU regulatory system is to rapidly detect these incidents and investigate whether there may be a link to the vaccine or whether they are the result of illnesses which occur by chance close in time to the vaccination. We are committed to ensure that any new suspected adverse reactions are rapidly investigated to support decisions based on science, which can then support confidence in vaccines, which is so important in dealing with this devastating pandemic that we are facing. And we remain fully mobilised to ensure our public health role. Today's conclusion helps us to continue in the fight against this pandemic by raising awareness and providing up-to-date information as we have analysed it and as it becomes available, so that citizens across Europe are informed about what they need to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cook. And now I hand over to Dr. Strauss. Dr. Strauss, please.
Thank you very much, Marie-Agnes, and good afternoon. The Pharmacovigilance Risk Assessment Committee, PROC, that I chair, has looked in great detail at the cases of blood clots reported after vaccination with COVID-19 vaccine AstraZeneca. As soon as these concerns arose last week, the committee started a comprehensive review of all the available evidence and working around the clock, making use of all the resources at our disposal. I want to thank the colleagues from the Belgium team that have led this assessment and worked side by side with colleagues from national competent authorities and the European Medicines Agency, as well as scientific experts in blood disorders, who we asked to provide advice in the assessment. The PROC has come to the following conclusions. This vaccine is safe and effective in preventing COVID-19, and its benefits continue to be far greater than its risks. PROC has found no evidence of a quality or a batch issue. The committee has assessed and discussed preclinical and clinical trial data, published literature, and adverse events related to the blood clots that have occurred during the vaccination campaign, reported by vaccinees and healthcare professionals. Critical to the review has been the careful scientific assessment and clinical scrutiny of the individual cases from the different member states. PROC noted that the number of thromboembolic events reported after vaccination is lower than the expected in the general population, and PROC has concluded that there is no increase in the overall risk of blood clots with this vaccine. Moreover, because the vaccine is effective in preventing COVID-19 disease, which in itself is a cause of blood clots, it likely reduces the risks of thrombotic events overall. However, there are also still some uncertainties. we have seen some very rare case reports describing specific unusual events of a combination of thrombosis and thrombocytopenia and bleeding. In a few cases, tiny clots developed in multiple blood vessels in the first 7 to 14 days after vaccination, a condition called disseminated intravascular coagulation. Also, in a few cases, we saw clots developing in blood vessels draining blood from the brain, and this condition is known as a cerebral venous sinus thrombosis. These conditions are linked to low levels of blood platelets, also known as thrombocytopenia, and the evidence we have is at the moment not sufficient to conclude with certainty whether these adverse events are indeed caused by the vaccine or not. So PRAC will continue to gather more information on these conditions, including additional studies, and PRAC will keep them under very close monitoring. PRAC also concluded that it's very important that these events are rare. As of last night, 7 cases of this disseminated intravascular coagulation and 18 cases of cerebral venous sinus thrombosis were reported out of almost 20 million vaccinated people. Furthermore, such cases were not identified in the large clinical trials, but that highlights the importance of being vigilant once the vaccine is administered to large populations. PRAC felt also that it is of great importance that healthcare professionals and people coming for a vaccination are aware of these possible adverse events and that they can spot possible signs or symptoms that may occur after the vaccination. Therefore, PRAC has recommended to add a warning to the SMPC and the patient leaflet and a description of these cases, so that this information should be provided to healthcare professionals and to the public. EMA and national health authorities will ensure that healthcare professionals and the general public are made aware of this information and made aware of the signs and symptoms of concern so that timely action can be taken to mitigate these risks. And with that, I would like to hand back to Marie-Agnes.
Many thanks, Dr. Strauss. We are now going to open the floor for questions. Only to remind you, if you wish to ask a question, please click on the raised hand icon, which appears when you move your mouse over your name in the participants list in WebEx. When I give you the floor, you will be asked on the screen to unmute yourself, and you can then start by stating your name and affiliation. So let's see who wants to ask a question. So far, I don't see anybody. Do we have any questions? Okay, there I see Gabrielle Zagni. So please, Gabrielle, can you ask your question? Unmute yourself and start your camera, please.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Gabriele Zagni, Italian TV, LA7, broadcast Piazza Pulita. Do you think that the application of the principle of precaution by more than 15 states like Germany, France, Italy, etc., risks to become a greater damage, going to undermine the trust of the population in AstraZeneca vaccine?
Perhaps I can ask Mrs. Cook to respond to this question. Mrs. Cook?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. I think a lot of member states are waiting for this outcome of the safety review, and they have indicated to us that what EMA has done from a scientific perspective is very important for them to make a decision on how to continue with the vaccination. So we are delivering on that promise today, and our responsibility is to come to a conclusion as to whether or not the benefits outweigh the risks of the vaccines so that countries can make an informed decision and increase trust in the vaccine.
Many thanks. So the next in line is Susie Ring from Bloomberg. Susie, please go ahead.
Hi there. Could you just clarify if there is any link found between these cases and the vaccine, what further steps you may take? Would that result in another label update or any other outcome? And could you also give some specifics around what kind of a label update we might see? Is it just related to these specific conditions or general information about blood clot awareness?
Many thanks, Susie. I would ask Dr. Strauss to respond to this. Sabine.
Yeah, thank you. PROC has concluded that there is a proposal to update section 4.4, that it's the warning section of the summary of the product characteristics, and in addition also the patient leaflet. But because this is, of course, a very special situation, PROC is also discussing tools and means to reach out to the more general public, and also a Dear Healthcare Professional letter, which is a term to be used for information that's being sent to healthcare professionals all over Europe in order to make them aware of this additional information and to help them to mitigate the risks in case patients might suffer from these signs and symptoms. And we also highlight to all the population that's being vaccinated to what symptoms and signs they should look out for in order to be on time if they develop something that might indicate that there is blood clotting issue.
Many thanks, Dr. Strauss. I now give the floor to Tom Clark from ITV. Tom, please. Tom, do you hear us? We see you, but we don't hear you. Can you open up your mic? Okay, let's perhaps first take another colleague and then we come back to you, Tom, yeah, if that's fine. Okay, so I take next Joe Barnes. Joe, please. Obviously, more people have connection problems today. Oh, Joe, I see you. Can you talk? Do you want to ask your question? Do you hear us? Obviously, we have a connection problem here. I'm sorry for that. Because I get the message from many journalists that they don't hear us. So, no, they don't hear us.
They don't hear us at all?
No, obviously not. Sorry, colleagues, we are looking into the problem.
Have they heard what we've said so far and the response to the first questions?
I think so, because they have then asked questions. We would have heard before if they wouldn't have heard us, they would have told us. So let's try with the next journalist, Roland Termote from The Standard. Can you hear us and can you ask your question?
I can hear you, and I hope you can hear me.
Yes, all fine. Thanks a lot.
Okay, because the connection dropped, I'm not sure whether this question has in the meantime been addressed or not. But so you mentioned that the evidence that you have at the moment is not sufficient to conclude with certainty whether these adverse events are caused by the vaccine, these rare adverse events. Could they be caused by something else, such as acute infection? And which other scenarios are you looking into with regards to factors that may have caused the syndromes that we've seen?
Many thanks. Dr. Strauss, can you take that question?
Thank you. We have been discussing quite some hypotheses to see what would be an explanation for these cases. And as we know, COVID itself is an important risk factor for thrombosis and also a post-COVID syndrome. We noted that often people are being hospitalized with thrombosis in the aorta. So it might be that that might have played a role, But for the moment, we still feel that we see sufficient information to include a warning in the product information. And we will further investigate with a scientific advisory group with additional studies, and maybe my colleague, Dr. Peter Arlett, would like to highlight the other studies that we are planning or the other investigations that might provide a more definite answer.
Many thanks. So, Peter, perhaps you can complete.
So thanks very much. Indeed, this is an important safety review, and we need to make sure that safety review continues and that we continue to be driven by science and have a fast but also robust evaluation. Further evaluation will include additional expert advice, will include using epidemiological studies, so studies using healthcare data from the real world, and we can use that to look at a population level as to what the levels of thrombosis are. And we can also look at laboratory tests to see whether there's anything in particular about these patients that are getting the unusual blood clots that might suggest or help us to understand the mechanism for the clots occurring. Thank you.
Many thanks for those additional explanations, Dr. Arlett. So I'll give now the floor to Jenny Hill from the BBC. Jenny?
Hello, yes. From your initial investigations into these rare events, is there any suggestion so far that specific groups of people might be considered to be at greater risk of a thrombosis event?
Dr. Strauss, please.
Thank you. Yes, the PROC review of the cases of thrombosis combined with thrombocytopenia has shown a predominance in some groups, and notably in women and younger women of younger age. However, at the moment, it's still rather premature to conclude on a very specific group, because the background risk of thrombosis may be different in this group, but it may also be the case that more people have been vaccinated in this specific group. For example, reflecting a predominance of younger women. And we know that in the different member states, different vaccination campaigns have been going on. So the potential for different risk levels is being part of the further evaluation, like highlighted before. And if risk minimization options are identified, these will, of course, be further communicated.
Many thanks. I'm now taking a question of Ole Alexander Sauer from the Aftenposten in Norway. Ole, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, perfect. Yes, I'm Ole Alexander from Norwegian Aftenposten. How do you assess today's report from Oslo University Hospital? Have you taken that into account?
I'll give the floor to Dr. Strauss.
Well, we have assessed everything that was available to us up until yesterday, because we have, of course, a report available for the full PROC to be discussed. So if there is a report that has come out today, that has not been included. But what has been included is the specific cases that we have received from Norway, and these have been discussed in depth. And also a Norwegian is represented in the Pharmacovigilance Risk Assessment Committee. So in that respect, we have taken everything on board. But if there is a study that has been published today, then we have not taken that on board yet. But it will be part of our continuous monitoring of these issues. And we will need to come back to these issues like we highlighted before anyway. So this is a preliminary conclusion on the specific cases. So it will be part of our further research for sure. Thank you.
Many thanks. I now give the floor again to Tom Clark, ITV. We couldn't hear your question initially. I hope this time it works. Tom, please.
Hello. Hi. Can you hear me this time?
Yes. Go ahead.
Thank you. The signal dropped out there for a bit. Thanks for coming back to me. I do appreciate it. Two questions. One, a technical one first. You mentioned you had 18 cases of CBST and 7 cases of another phenomenon. I didn't quite follow your description of it. Could you give us a little bit of a clarification on that? But secondly, can you help explain why we've seen significantly more cases of these events in EU countries compared to in the UK, where we only have 5 reported cases of CVST, even though twice as many doses of AstraZeneca vaccine have been distributed here in the UK?
Thanks, Tom. Dr. Strauss?
Yeah, thank you. Well, the DIC, disseminated intravascular coagulation, is a disease or a syndrome where there is thrombosis, so coagulation, whilst at the same time the blood platelets, the thrombocytes, are depleted, and therefore you get thrombosis in combination with bleeding. So it's that's a little bit of a further explanation of this specific disease. And it's at the moment it's rather difficult to know exactly the reasons why there is a difference in the cases. We're working from spontaneously reported cases, and what we know for sure is that the populations that have been vaccinated are very different between the different member states and between the UK. That might be a possible explanation, but at the moment we're not sure how to explain that. I don't know if Dr. Peter Arlett would like to come in.
Dr. Arlett?
If I was to speculate, I think the most likely explanation is different populations being vaccinated. We know the AstraZeneca vaccine in the UK was given predominantly to older patients, and we know compared to the totality of European member states, therefore if blood clotting disorders are more common in younger women, for example, then it would suggest that you would get more cases in Europe than you would in the UK.
Many thanks. So now the floor is given to Kai Kupferschmidt. Can you please ask your question, Kai?
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, I'd appreciate it if you maybe could break down in terms of the cases of DIC and the thrombosis, whether you could say how many countries these are from. But mainly I wanted to ask, when you say DIC, we've had this discussion in Germany, of course, also about hemolytic uremic syndrome. There's, the complement system involvement. Do you have any further ideas on what exactly might be happening if indeed the vaccine were involved that could trigger this?
Dr. Strauss, please.
Thank you. Yes, I can give you a breakdown on the CVST. As of yesterday, of course, we have 7 cases from Germany, 3 cases from Italy, 2 cases from Norway, and 1 from Spain. And we have, in addition to that, 3 cases in the UK and 2 from India. And I think it's a very relevant question that you are posing on what is exactly going on. And that's something that we are going to investigate and explore further in the near future with our advisory group, with specialists, with hopefully results from studies that will become available. But for the moment, it's all speculation. So,
thank you very much. So next is Jenny Strasbourg from Wall Street Journal. Jenny, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Given instances of thromboembolic events related to other vaccines, are you thinking of warning on those labels as well? And given that Ms. Cook said on Tuesday that you received more reports based on the awareness of these issues and the media around it, can you give us a breakdown of what vaccines you received more reports from? Was it mostly one or the other, or a mix of vaccines? Thank you.
Dr. Strauss, and then Mrs. Cook can complement. Yes, please.
Thank you. Yeah, it's what we highlighted before, and what was also highlighted is that if you're going to vaccinate a very large population of people, as we are doing now, you will always encounter certain events that occur in close temporal relationship with the vaccine. And we know that thrombosis and thromboembolisms are very common conditions. And I have some figures here that approximately 100,000 people develop blood clots every month in the European Union for different reasons, for all different reasons. So obviously, we also have reports coming in for all the vaccines on the different, on these blood clots and this thrombosis and thromboembolisms. But for now, the reporting, as is with the case with the AstraZeneca vaccine for the general occurrence of thrombosis and thromboembolisms, is below what we would expect from based on the background occurrence of these clotting diseases. So at the moment, I cannot give you a very detailed breakdown, but we have looked into this from a thrombosis, thromboembolic perspective, and at the moment, there is no indication that the observed cases would be higher than the expected cases. So, like we highlighted before, these cases occur always, and they also will occur in temporal relationship with the vaccination.
Many thanks, and I'll give also the floor to Mrs. Cook.
Yeah, thank you very much. And yes, just to continue, just to say that we have now 4 authorised vaccines in Europe, and we are looking at the thromboembolic rates, reporting rates for all 4 of them. The 4th one, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, is not yet on the market, so we're asking for specific investigations on this before, because we can't just tell from the reports coming in. We're also in close contact with regulators across the world who have their own experience with different vaccines, so that one, they can alert us as to any heightened problem. So far, we haven't seen that. But with increasing awareness, we may see also an increase in reports for all vaccines.
Many thanks, Mrs. Cook. So the next question comes from Verena Schmidt from the German news agency dpa. Verena, please. Can you hear us, Verena?
You hear me?
Yes, now we hear you. Go ahead.
Super. Thank you. Sorry, that was a technical hiccup. Yes, I'm Verena Schmidt-Hoschmann with the German press agency dpa. And my question is just from a consumer point of view, what exactly does that warning mean for people like me who want to get vaccinated in the near future? And would you advise anybody who has qualms about this vaccine to just refrain and wait for something else? Thank you.
Mrs. Cook, you want to take that one?
Yeah, one of the reasons that we are highlighting the conclusions from the safety discussions today is so that we raise awareness among people who have been vaccinated or intend to be vaccinated about things that they should look out for just in case they have any problem. If it was me, I would be vaccinated tomorrow, but I would want to know that if anything happened to me after vaccination, what I should do about it, and that's what we're saying today.
Thank you very much. The next question comes from Bruno Waterfield from The Times. Bruno, please go ahead.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me. Thank you for taking my question. I'm aware of the fact that there have been a number of cases in the United States of a condition called immune thrombocytopenia, ITP. Obviously, in the United States, there are different vaccines that have been authorised, Pfizer and Moderna. I just wondered whether you had looked at those cases, whether you could comment on them as an avenue of investigation, because it would seem to suggest that there's a broader problem than just AstraZeneca there, which links into what Peter was, or someone was saying about looking at all the authorised vaccines. I think it was EMA. But if you could tell us a bit more about those wider investigations. Is this just uniquely a problem with AstraZeneca, or are there cases elsewhere as well with other vaccines? Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Bruno. Dr. Strauss, please.
Thank you very much for that question. That's a highly relevant point. And in the PROC agenda, there is a new signal highlighted, which is for all 3 vaccines and which concerns ITP. So the investigations have started there for all 3 vaccines, and we will come back to that as soon as possible, as soon as we have concluded that. But that's a signal that's ongoing at the moment. And does that answer your question?
Yes, I think it did. So let's go to the next colleague. I give the floor to Naomi O'Leary from the Irish Times. Naomi.
Thank you very much for taking my question. Is there any indication that perhaps these events could be more common in people who have had COVID-19 already and have come through it? Thank you.
Dr. Strauss, please.
Thank you very much. That's a very relevant question. And we are aware of cases described in the literature where young people who had asymptomatic COVID later on developed thrombotic events and thromboembolic events. However, in these cases, as far as they were available, we looked at the PCR to test for COVID, so they didn't have an active infection, but it's still very well possible that it might be something from a post-COVID period, and that's another thing that we will investigate and explore further in the near future.
Thank you very much. The next question is from Laila Liverpool from the New Scientist. Laila, please go ahead.
Thank you. I'm wondering if reports of these rare events are more common in younger women. Is there a possibility of a link with the contraceptive pill? And is this something that the EMA is also investigating?
Dr. Strauss, please.
Thank you very much. And yes, it is always a distinct possibility. And we have looked into that. We know that in general for the occurrence, because we shouldn't forget that the CVST occurs also at a certain level in the background anyway. And there, one of the risk factors that is highlighted for the disease or the syndrome as such is indeed oral contraceptives. So that's also one of the things that we will be further investigating in the near future.
Many thanks. So the next question comes from Donato Mancini from the Financial Times. Donato, please go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thanks for taking my question. So I know you've ruled out the batch hypothesis for blood clots in general, but can you confirm the same has happened for the more serious combination of cerebral thrombosis and low platelet counts, or is that still a possibility there? Thank you so much.
Dr. Strauss?
Thank you very much. PROC has received advice from the Biologicals Working Party that has looked very carefully into this issue, and there is no batch-related issue. There's no issue with batch quality at all. So the possible link is not there, also not for these very special cases.
Thank you very much. The next question comes from Antje Höning from Rheinische Post. Antje?
Thank you. I have 2 questions. Can you say us something about a special risk for a young woman who are smoking? It was a debate in Germany. And the second question is, do you think that it was right that so many countries have stopped the vaccination?
Okay, the first question to Dr. Strauss, and then I hand over to Mrs. Cook.
Thank you. Yes, smoking is, of course, a well-known risk factor for thrombosis anyway. I'm not sure yet that it's a real risk factor for these very specific cases, but it's something we are also looking into. Thank you.
Mrs. Cook, can you answer the second question?
Yeah, so I think it's very important to highlight that when a country makes a decision about vaccination, they do that with the full knowledge of their population, of what's available and what the particular risk factors to their population are. What our job is to look at the vaccine and to see whether it's safe, quality and effective, and whether the benefit outweighs the risk. And that's what we have done. We cannot comment on the individual decisions in member states.
Many thanks, Mrs. Cook. So now we have Gretchen Vogel from the Science magazine. Gretchen, go ahead, please.
Hello. Two questions, if I may. Just a quick question about the numbers you mentioned from Norway. I had understood that there were 4 cases there, but you had mentioned...
Can you speak up a bit? We don't really understand you.
Yes?
Can you speak up a bit?
Sorry.
Much better, I think. Yeah, thank you.
Better?
Much better.
Okay. All right. First, a brief question about Norway. You mentioned 2 cases of the stroke. I understood that there were 4 cases that they were looking at.
Sorry, you're still breaking up.
Ben,
Perhaps you need to give us your question in the chat. We are going then to read it because you're breaking off. We can't really understand it.
I can do that.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
I will do that.
Thank you. So I give the floor now to Kate Powling from Good Morning Britain. Kate, please.
Hi. Can I ask, how concerned are you about national regulators making unilateral decisions that have caused a lot of worry among the 11 million who have been vaccinated in the UK?
Mrs. Cook, can you take that question, please? Thanks.
Yeah, I think it's very, very important that the national authorities have the right scientific basis on which to make their decisions, but they make their decisions in the context of the knowledge of their population on what vaccines they have available, on what specific risks they have identified, and what their vaccination campaigns have been. Our job is to ensure that we provide the right evidence on the vaccine so that countries can make an informed decision.
Thank you very much. So now we have Thomas Migliarino from Switzerland. Thomas, please.
Yes, thank you. Mrs. Cook, is there any discussion among the experts as to whether we can harmonize the application of the precautionary principle? Because this might not be the first situation we are in. Is that even possible to harmonize the application of the precautionary principle? Thank you very much.
Mrs. Cook, please.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that we need to do to make sure that everybody has the same information about the benefits and risks. And we tend to look at from the regulatory perspective because we are medicines regulators. We work very closely with medicines regulators in Europe who are part of our network. We also work with medicines regulators across the world. But we're not the only actor in the supply of in the rollout of vaccines, and we need to work with the national immunisation technical advisory committees and with the scientific advisors in member states as well, so that we all have the same information so that everybody can make informed decisions.
Many thanks. We try again, Joe Barnes from Express. We didn't hear your question, or we didn't hear you speak, actually. Does it work now? Joe, can you try?
Sorry, yes, Joe Barnes from the Daily Express. I must have been disconnected at the time. Thank you for taking my question. So just very quickly, on the information and the evidence you have based today, published today, should the EU and European countries that have stopped using AstraZeneca immediately start jabbing people in the arms and continuing their rollout from now? And then you mentioned, coffee machines going from the background, that 2,500 people died in one day last week. Do you think that countries stopping using the AstraZeneca jab has cost lives? Thank you.
Mrs. Cook, do you want to respond to that question?
Yes, I think we just have to continually remind ourselves of what a difficult situation we are in. This pandemic is causing lives. We have vaccines that are safe and effective that can help prevent death and hospitalisation. We need to use those vaccines within the environments that we have them. Thank you.
Okay, many thanks, Mrs. Cook. I now have a follow-up question from Gretchen Vogel. She was from the German press agency. So she wants to clarify the numbers from Norway, Dr. Strauss. Earlier you said there were 2, but Norwegian officials have mentioned 4. Were 2 of those the DIC cases you mentioned, Dr. Strauss?
Thank you very much for the follow-up question. Yeah, the numbers are challenging, I think. What we have done is we have taken the cases, we have discussed at the level of the Pharmacovigilance Risk Assessment Committee all the cases, also all the Norwegian cases that were available to us up until yesterday. And we have, after careful review, categorized 2 of those cases as CVST cases, and that has been our main focus. So therefore there is a bit of a difference between the numbers that are being used, but like I highlighted, the numbers are quite difficult, but we reviewed all the cases that were reported and brought to our attention in the different member states.
Okay, many thanks. So I think that these were the questions we received. I want to thank all of you for attending this press conference. If you have any further questions, please do not hesitate to contact our press office. And I also want to recommend to you to look at our website, ema.europa.eu, because you will find additional information about our safety monitoring of COVID-19 vaccines on this website. So thank you very much and goodbye.